At 12:30 in the morning, a poisonous cloud rolled through the streets of a sleeping city, and by sunrise, thousands were dead. They didn't hear an explosion. They didn't see fire. They woke up gasping, their eyes burning, their lungs collapsing, running blind through a fog that smelled like burning rubber. Some made it 3 steps before they fell. Others never left their beds. In less than 6 hours, one of the deadliest industrial catastrophes in human history unfolded, inside a factory that was supposed to feed the world, not destroy it. This wasn't a natural disaster. There was no earthquake, no storm, no accident of nature. This was engineered failure, a forbidden shortcut, buried deep inside cost-cutting decisions made thousands of miles away. In boardrooms where no one could hear the screaming. A safety system that should have stopped this was switched off. A warning that should have saved lives was ignored. And when the gas finally escaped, it didn't just kill in that first terrifying night. It kept killing for decades, seeping into blood, into lungs, into the bodies of children not yet born. This is the story of a promise of progress that turned into the deadliest industrial nightmare of the 20th century. And the terrifying truth is, the warning signs were there all along. Someone knew, and they said nothing. What would you have done if you had known? Rewind to the early 1980s. In the heart of India, a city called Bhopal was growing fast. Families flocked here, drawn by cheap land, steady work, and a promise carved into billboards. Prosperity through progress. At the center of it all stood a towering pesticide factory, built by an American chemical giant, promising to arm farmers against famine and feed a hungry nation. For a while, it worked. The plant became a symbol of industrial hope, employing thousands, feeding dreams of a better life to families who built their homes right up against its fences, never knowing what was buried inside those storage tanks. Inside those tanks sat tons of a chemical so unstable, so volatile, that a handful of unauthorized decisions could turn it into a weapon. Methyl isocyanate, a substance that reacts violently with water, that generates unbearable heat, that turns into a gas capable of shredding human lungs from the inside. The plant had refrigeration units designed to keep it stable, and layered safety systems built specifically to prevent exactly this kind of catastrophe. But by the early 1980s, the factory was losing money, and when profits vanish, corners get cut, maintenance budgets shrank, trained staff were let go, and never fully replaced. Safety drills stopped altogether. Warning alarms had gone off so many times before, from minor leaks and near misses, that workers started ignoring them, dismissing them as false alarms, background noise in a factory, slowly rotting from neglect, hiding in plain sight beside the homes of the very people it would soon destroy. And then, investigators would later uncover something almost impossible to believe. On the night everything went wrong, the refrigeration system, meant to keep that deadly chemical stable, had been shut off entirely. To save electricity, on the night of December 2, 1984, water entered Tank 610. Investigators still debate exactly how: a maintenance error, a corroded pipe never properly cleaned, a chain of small failures no single person intended. But what happened next is not in dispute. Water met methyl isocyanate, and the reaction turned catastrophic within minutes. Temperatures inside the tank soared past anything the gauges were built to measure. Pressure built, and built, until it had nowhere left to go. At 12:30 a.m., the safety valve gave way, and roughly 40 tons of lethal gas erupted into the Fandamite night sky, above a city of nearly 1 million sleeping people. The gas scrubber that should have neutralized it wasn't running. The flare tower that should have burned it off had been disconnected for maintenance weeks earlier, and never reconnected. Every single backup system, one after another, had already failed, or had already been disabled. The gas rolled low across the ground, heavier than air, drifting silently into homes with open windows, into slums built right against the factory's perimeter fence. There was no siren for over 2 hours. By the time warnings finally sounded, thousands had already inhaled enough toxic gas to destroy their respiratory systems permanently. Survivors would later describe waking to a world on fire without flames, eyes swelling shut, throats closing, stumbling over the bodies of neighbors who never made it out of bed. Hospitals had no idea what they were treating. Doctors had never been told which chemicals were stored inside that plant, information the company had guarded for years. Even from local medical authorities, who could have prepared, could have known which antidote to give, could have saved thousands more lives with a single piece of paper. Official government figures placed the immediate death toll near 4,000, but long-term studies conducted over the following decades revealed a far more staggering number, closer to 20,000 deaths, from a single night of failure. In the years that followed, the true scale of the suffering only grew clearer. More than 500,000 people had been exposed to that gas cloud. Survivors developed blindness, chronic lung disease, kidney failure, and reproductive disorders that passed down into their children. Decades later, birth defects were still being recorded in babies born to mothers who had never even lived through the disaster themselves. Poisoned soil and groundwater still leaching, contamination into the city's water supply, generation after generation. And the justice survivors were promised never fully arrived. The company reached a settlement with the government years later for a fraction of what the devastation actually cost, a few $100s per victim, distributed only after years of grinding legal delay. The plant's chairman was charged with culpable homicide, but he left the country days after the disaster and was never extradited to face trial. Multiple appeals, corporate restructuring, and years of legal maneuvering meant no single executive ever served meaningful time behind bars for one of the deadliest industrial disasters in recorded history. Courtrooms changed, ownership changed, paperwork changed hands again and again, but accountability never quite arrived at anyone's doorstep. The factory itself was simply abandoned, left standing, rusting, its poisoned grounds never properly cleaned. Today, that same soil still contaminates the water beneath thousands of homes. Why does this still matter right now? Because the same pattern, profit prioritized over safety, warnings ignored, corners cut in silence, has repeated itself again and again across industries worldwide. In different countries, under different names. Every time a company weighs a maintenance budget against human lives, this story becomes relevant again. This wasn't just a tragedy that ended in 1984. It's a warning that never stopped being urgent. Every disaster like this begins the same way, not with malice, but with silence. A skipped inspection, a disabled alarm, a cost no one wanted to explain to shareholders. This catastrophe didn't happen because no one knew the danger. It happened because too many people decided the danger wasn't their problem to solve. That's the real horror buried inside this story. It wasn't unpredictable. It wasn't unavoidable. It was ignored, one small decision at a time, until ignoring it became impossible to undo. So, the next time you hear a company promise progress, ask what they might be quietly cutting to deliver it. Ask who pays the price when the warning light gets switched off. We'd love to know, what part of this story disturbed you the most? Tell us in the comments below, because these stories only stay buried when we stop talking about them. And if stories like this deserve to be remembered, not buried, consider staying close for the next one.